The child's shoes made no sound against the polished marble floor, yet every head in the restaurant turned as if pulled by an invisible thread. The little girl could not have been older than 7. Her school uniform was rumpled, stained by rain or tears. No one could tell the difference. Her tiny hands clutched a folded piece of paper so tightly that her knuckles turned white, stark against her small porcelain bones. The restaurant sat in the center of Seattle, a place where business elites and political figures dined beneath warm golden lights cast from vintage fixtures, their glow reflecting off crystal glasses and plates worth more than her mother's yearly income. At the most secluded table, where one could see both the main entrance and the hallway leading to the kitchen, Damien Rourke sat alone. The man carried the stillness of power in the way others carried breath, dressed in a charcoal suit, tailored so perfectly it seemed carved onto him, his dark hair swept back with a hint of silver near the temples, and his eyes cold beneath heavy brows. A faint scar ran down his left cheek, stretching from his temple to his jawline, a mark infamous throughout Seattle, the kind no ordinary accident would produce. The girl stepped into that world like a ghost slipping between shadows, weaving past tables where people murmured about financial deals, real estate contracts, and numbers that towered far beyond everything her mother earned in an entire year. A few women in evening gowns paused mid-laughter, confusion mingling with irritation. A waiter made a move to approach her, but Damien raised 2 fingers without looking up, and the man froze instantly, as if held in place by something unseen. The restaurant manager appeared with a fixed professional smile, his arms politely extended to handle what he clearly deemed a disruption. But one brief glance from Damien sent him retreating as if he had just remembered an urgent task elsewhere. The little girl stopped about, a yard from Damien's table, keeping a cautious distance like someone who had learned early that adults could be dangerous. Her breath came in quick bursts, her chest rising beneath a worn school blazer, embroidered with the elementary school's logo. The paper trembled in her hands like a trapped fledgling. "Can you take me to school?" Her voice was a whisper, each word squeezed tight by fear swelling in her throat. The sentence was grammatically wrong, not because she did not know better, but because panic had washed every lesson clean, as if school itself had never protected her. Damien placed his knife down, the sound of metal striking porcelain echoing sharply in the quiet room. He studied her the way he read a contract, searching for deceit, but finding only naked terror. Behind his gaze flickered a recognition of something he had once seen in the mirror, back when he was a child who survived a world no one ever came to save him from. Why? A single word. Not cold, not threatening, but the simple curiosity of a man who never moved without understanding motive. He leaned back slightly, giving her space to breathe, space to choose between speaking or fleeing. Her hands trembled harder as she unfolded the paper, smoothing it against her chest before holding it out. When she moved, her sleeve slipped back, revealing bruises wrapped around her wrist, yellow and purple marks shaped like the fingers of an adult who had gripped too hard. Damien noticed, though she did not. They push me every day. They say mean things, and no one stops them. Her voice cracked, but her words poured out faster, like floodwater bursting through a broken dam. There is a man in a black car who follows me home, and he knows where I live. Damien took the paper from her slowly, carefully. It was a crayon drawing, faded and smudged, showing a tiny girl surrounded by large, angry figures, and beside them, a black rectangle with 4 circles for wheels. At the corner of the page was a shaky scrawl of an address. I told my teacher and she said I imagined it. I told the principal and he said kids should learn to solve problems by themselves. My mom called the police. They said mean words are not a crime. Her voice broke entirely then, tears spilling although she tried desperately to hold them back. The entire restaurant became a painting in stillness. Everyone knew they were witnessing something that would be whispered about for years. Damien folded the paper with care, like a piece of evidence worn soft by being handled too many times, marked by silent preparation. Why me? He asked the most important question, the one that separated random desperation from chosen intent. His reputation was no secret. Seattle knew the name Damien Rourke, and what happened when someone crossed his line for the wrong reasons. The girl wiped her tears with the back of her hand, leaving a long smudge across her cheek. Because everyone is scared of you, and I thought, if they're scared of you, maybe they won't hurt me anymore. The logic was brutally simple. It was the reasoning of a child who had learned that fear was the only currency left in a world where no one listened. If the moment this trembling child stood beneath the warm, golden lights of the restaurant, or the instant Damien Rourke quietly set down his knife, and the entire room seemed to stop, made your heart tighten the way it did mine, then don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Like and share this video, so you won't miss the deeply emotional and powerful stories we bring every day. And where are you listening from? Leave your city or country in the comments, so I'll know where Emily's journey and the darkness she is trying to outrun have reached across this world. Damien watched her for a long moment, his expression unchanged, yet something deep within him shifted. He had seen every manipulation crafted to draw sympathy, from adults who begged for compassion to children trained to take advantage of a protector's instinct. But this child was different. No plan, no performance, only fear, pain, and the fragile thread of hope clinging to something reason could not explain. He gestured for the waiter to bring her a cup of hot chocolate. When it was placed on the table, she only glanced at it before lowering her eyes again, her hands still gripping her backpack. Damien asked nothing more. He knew that once fear consumed the body, words often only made everything worse, so he sat with her in silence, letting her feel safe, at least for now. When Emily was taken home by his personal driver along with an assistant he trusted, Damien remained seated. The restaurant lights dimmed with the hour, catching the clear rim of his untouched glass of wine. Outside the window, Seattle's damp night unfolded in muted gray. This city belonged to him. Not in the way governments or corporations claimed ownership, but in the way someone who operated behind every transaction and every shadow understood its pulse. From the shipping containers at the port to the transit lines, from this fine dining room to half-built construction sites, he ruled through presence, through silence, through a power that required no raised voice. As a boy, he had lived with fear and impossible choices. He had stood before closed doors, labeled unwanted by the world, unheard and unprotected. From that place he built his empire, brick by brick, on a foundation of anger and a craving for control. But the cost of power was isolation. He had no family, no kin, only people who served him out of loyalty or fear. And for a long time, Damien believed that was enough, until a little girl stood before him with a single heartbreaking truth. If they are scared of you, maybe they will not hurt me anymore. Her words pierced deeper than mercy. They cracked something open. She was not asking to be loved or rescued for kindness. She simply wanted to survive. She wanted one day to walk into school without trembling, without glancing over her shoulder. She needed him not as a savior, but as a wall no one dared cross. And no one understood that role better than Damien. He called Cole, his longtime second in command. His tone remained calm, but Cole, with the instinct of a man who had survived this world, sensed the shift immediately. Damien ordered him to verify the address Emily wrote, investigate her mother, her school, and every recent incident. He did not want a report the next day. He wanted it within hours. Cole simply nodded through the phone, asking nothing further. They had worked together long enough to know that when Damien spoke, something serious had begun to stir. After the call, Damien returned to his seat, opened his phone, and stared at the photo of Emily's crayon drawing, the shaky lines, the black car, the furious, faceless figures. A child's attempt to depict a darkness adults insisted on ignoring, and in that instant, he knew. This was no longer about a child. This was about power, about who was allowed to inflict fear, and who was allowed to live without it. And in a city where justice was a luxury, Damien Rourke would be the law, not out of kindness, but because there were lines no one was allowed to cross, even in the dark. 2 hours after Emily left the restaurant, Damien stood inside his top-floor office overlooking Elliott Bay. The room was wide and luxuriously minimalist, with an entire glass wall gazing out toward the harbor glowing beneath the city's pale yellow nightlights. On his desk lay Emily's drawing, now pressed flat beneath a pane of clear glass, illuminated by a vintage desk lamp. Damien had not looked away from it once. It was a wax crayon drawing made by a 7-year-old child, yet within it pulsed the panic and pain of an entire world. The little girl stood in the center of towering figures, their faces twisted with harsh black strokes, jagged and heavy. There was a rectangular car with 4 round wheels, shaded in deep black, and in the bottom corner was the address, written with a stiffness that trembled between fear and determination. Nothing in the drawing was accidental. Damien studied it as if it were a battlefield map. Every line was evidence, every choice of color a plea for help. The picture was more than a child's confession. It was a report more detailed than any file the police had ever produced. His assistant, Juno Park, entered after a soft knock, a tablet in her hands. She spoke briefly, her voice steady though tension flickered in her eyes. Emily Brooks, 7 years old, second-grade student at Brookdale Elementary. Lives with her mother, Lena Brooks, 27 years old, part-time preschool teacher who works evening shifts at a diner. Address is an old apartment complex on 35th South. No father. No close relatives. Damien nodded without asking further. He knew that kind of building. He had grown up in one just like it, where people turned down the television to avoid hearing shouting through the walls, where stairwell lights flickered endlessly, and everyone avoided conversation because exhaustion had stripped them of the ability to care. Juno continued. Emily had visited the school nurse 3 times in 2 months, most recently the previous week with scraped knees, but no medical records existed in the city system. Her mother filed complaints with the school administration about being followed by a black SUV, license plate unknown. The principal did not respond. Police logged the reports but classified them as lacking verifiable evidence. Damien's brow tightened. Every word Juno read was an accusation leveled at a system society glorified. The adults in this story had all stepped back. The police, the teachers, the principal. They all saw the wounds and chose to look away. Damien inhaled slowly, turning his gaze back to the drawing. When he looked at it the 3rd time, he noticed a tiny detail hidden beneath the layers of color. A small arm being pulled by a larger hand, that hand faceless, nothing more than thick fingers gripping the girl with an unmistakable force she did not want. Beneath it was an arrow pointing toward the car. One did not need to be a psychologist to understand the message. Emily was being threatened. Someone was trying to take her, and she had resisted in the only way she knew how, by drawing the truth she could not speak. Damien murmured under his breath, barely audible, though Juno heard him. It is a warning from a child who knew she would not be believed. He rose and walked to the window, where harbor lights shimmered on the water's surface. Outside, the city continued its frantic rhythm, but a part of it was rotting from within. Damien had believed himself incapable of surprise, yet the way a 7-year-old girl used fear as her shield made it impossible for him to remain still. This was not a cry for attention. It was a declaration. She had chosen him not because he was kind, but because he was dangerous, and in her world, only danger could stop something worse. Damien turned back to Juno, his voice low but firm. Find that car. Find the one who made a child come to me. And this time, I want every name involved to understand they have crossed a line. Juno nodded and slipped silently out of the room. Damien watched her go, then returned to the drawing once more. The paper still seemed to tremble in the breeze, slipping through the slightly opened window, just as the small hand had trembled when she gave it to him. But now, it was no longer a simple drawing. It was the beginning of everything, and he would not allow anyone to ignore it again. Lena sat at the edge of her bed, the faint glow of a bedside lamp washing her face in a tired pale gold. Her eyes were shadowed from nights without sleep, and her thin fingers clutched her phone as she waited for a message she knew would never arrive. Emily had fallen asleep upon returning from the restaurant, sleeping more soundly than she had in many weeks. Perhaps it was because the black car had not appeared that day, or because the stranger's driver had quietly taken the girl's hand and walked her inside the building with a calm, unsettling authority that left Lena feeling both relieved and uneasy. Damien Rourke. She knew little about him, only hearing his name whispered at the diner where she worked evenings. Some customers lowered their voices whenever he was mentioned, always accompanied by wary looks and half-told stories no one dared to finish. But Emily had gone to him, and Lena did not know how to feel about that. Her daughter had never told her about drawing that picture, never said she had gone to seek out a stranger in a city so vast, but Lena understood. She understood because she had once stood exactly where Emily now stood, knocking on doors, voicing her fear, and receiving only polite nods, sympathetic glances, and empty reassurances. She had called the police 3 times in 2 weeks, reported the black SUV that lingered by the school gate, sometimes trailing them all the way to their apartment complex. She reported it to the principal, to the homeroom teacher, but they all said it might be coincidence, or simply a parent waiting for a child. When Emily came home with bruises around her arm, Lena took her to the school nurse, They said it was likely from a fall during recess. When the girl cried at night, clinging to her and whispering that someone was watching her through the window, Lena could only hold her close and soothe her with promises she no longer believed. She had once thought herself strong. Pregnant at 19, a mother at 20, juggling 3 jobs, earning her preschool teaching credential at night. She had believed that effort alone could fix anything, but exhaustion had no bottom. Life rose like a tide that never receded. She chose between evening shifts and school drop-offs, between rent and dinners with meat, between silence and becoming a nuisance to people with power. Because who would listen to a temporary teacher, an unmarried mother living in a poor neighborhood questioning safety at a school funded by wealthy philanthropists? Lena knew the name behind the condescending looks she received in the school office. Philip Mercer, father of one of the boys who bullied Emily, and a major donor to the new library fund. Every time she spoke, people heard her, but no one listened. They smiled, took notes, then filed the papers away, and the black car remained. Emily still walked to school each morning with fear tucked between her books. One day, Lena saw her daughter scribbling on a piece of paper, drawing a figure and a car. She almost asked, but stopped herself, afraid that hearing the answer would break the thin facade of strength she needed to survive. Now everything peeled away like paint washed off by rain. Damien Rourke had seen what no one else wanted to see, and he had acted. Lena did not know why, nor what this would lead to. But in that brief moment, when she saw her daughter sleeping without twisting in fear, for the first time in weeks, she cried. Not from terror, but from relief. A stranger had seen them, and for Lena, that alone felt like a miracle. But every miracle came with a cost, and she knew that when morning light slipped through the thin curtains of their apartment, she would face a world no longer as silent as before. The morning passed with a kind of artificial calm. Sunlight slipped through the thin curtains and made the small third-floor apartment feel warm in a way that felt like a trick. Lena rose early, as she always did, preparing a warm cup of milk and 2 slices of peanut butter toast for Emily, the one form of stability she tried to preserve for her daughter in a world that kept tilting beneath their feet. Emily sat at the small table, her head lowered slightly, faint circles still shadowing her eyes after a long night's sleep that had not been entirely peaceful. She did not mention the night before, did not speak of the man who brought her home, or the drawing she had once folded tightly in her backpack. Lena did not ask, not because she did not want to know, but because she feared the answers would break her. Inside her, questions rose like a steady tide. Who was Damien Rourke in this story? Why would a man like him stop for a stranger's child? And what was happening behind the scenes that she could not see? She took Emily to school on the same bus they always used. On the bus, the familiar faces stayed silent, drifting past one another like ghosts, living parallel lives in the city. No one spoke, no one looked, everyone carried their own weariness. In front of the school gate, Lena knelt to tighten Emily's shoelaces. The girl remained quiet, but the way she hugged her backpack to her chest and turned her head every few steps showed her fear had not loosened its grip. When Lena walked into the school office, the same office where she had filed 3 official complaints, no one looked up. The administrative secretary was on the phone discussing floral arrangements for a parent association event, and the vice principal stared at her computer screen as if welded to it. Lena approached the desk, her voice steady, polite. "I would like to see Principal Conway. I left 3 messages last week." The secretary glanced at the scheduling book and answered without hesitation. "He is in meetings all day. I will leave a note." Lena let out a faint laugh, one without the smallest trace of joy. She had heard that exact response before. Last week, the week before, and the week before that, when her daughter was shoved into a wall during recess, when her backpack was thrown into the restroom, when she came home with a long scrape on her shoulder that the gym teacher called a minor accident during practice. There was always a reason, always some way to dodge responsibility. Lena had sent emails, made calls, even printed photos of Emily's bruises and brought them in. The only response she ever received was a suggestion. She should enroll Emily in an adjustment skills class. An adjustment class. As if the child were the problem, as if the only way to be accepted was to learn to endure. Lena stepped out of the office, her shoulders sinking not only from disappointment but from the growing certainty that she and Emily had been placed on an invisible list. A list of people who did not matter, people without a voice, people who could be ignored without consequence. On her way home, She noticed the school sign had been replaced with a new logo, and the playground was being upgraded with modern equipment funded by a new donor. Bright colors, fresh paint, everything gleaming and spotless. It all looked beautiful, if one did not know that inside those grounds, there were children learning to stay silent in order to survive. That afternoon, Lena returned to the apartment just long enough to change into her diner uniform for the evening shift. She put on her thin coat with frayed edges, straightened the crooked name tag pinned to her chest, and stepped out, leaving Emily in the care of the kind elderly neighbor downstairs. As she walked along the uneven boulevard, she wondered what would happen if she were gone. If one day she simply disappeared, would anyone step into Emily's life and see her the way Damien did? Or would the child be pulled under the way so many forgotten children had been? A cold wind rustled through the brittle trees, sending a torn scrap of paper swirling past her feet. Lena paused, staring at it as though searching for an omen in a meaningless moment. Then she moved on, because there was no other choice but to keep going. In this world, no one came to save you, and the system had learned to survive by pretending not to see people like her. When evening fell and the city began to breathe slower after a day of chaos, Damien sat inside his quiet office, the single desk lamp casting a warm gold over the dark wooden table. On the wall screen were images clipped from security cameras around Brookdale Elementary, arranged into a sequence of still frames. Juno stood behind him, tablet in hand, her gaze focused and tight with tension. The black SUV appeared in at least 8 frames, each one taken during school drop-off or pickup hours, parked roughly 30 meters from the gate, the angle clear enough to capture a license plate obscured by tinted glass, and a distinctive long scratch down the back left door. Damien stood with his arms crossed, eyes fixed on the screen. One frame showed the vehicle near Lena's apartment close to midnight, captured by a private security camera a tenant had installed. The engine stayed on, headlights glowing, the vehicle parked there for nearly 17 minutes before driving away. No one stepped out, no one approached the building. But that silence, that persistent presence without overt action, was what made it dangerous. Damien nodded for Juno to continue. Cole's report had arrived less than an hour earlier, encrypted and routed through Damien's private network. The SUV was registered to a small shipping firm called Halston Freight Logistics, an office located in the industrial South End, near an old freight station that had been shut down for years. On paper, the company had ceased operations 3 months earlier, though its legal registration remained active. The listed owner was a meaningless name, but 3 levels of verification pointed toward the same answer: the Rainford crew. Damien exhaled, slow and controlled, the kind of breath that acknowledged something expected yet still heavy. The Rainford crew was a low-tier, but reckless criminal group, active in the southern districts. They were not known for shootouts or street executions, but for psychological intimidation and extortion. They did not hold guns to people's heads. They simply sat in their cars, waited outside schools, and let their targets imagine the rest. According to the file Juno now displayed, the crew had recently shifted toward a more calculated scheme, targeting low-income housing complexes where single mothers were common, then slowly approaching them with so-called safety warnings. They did not threaten at first. They simply offered reminders, left business cards, sent a box of pastries to the door as a gesture of concern. But if refused, the black SUV began to appear. Children began to be followed. Fear grew day by day, until a parent eventually called back, agreeing to pay a monthly community security fee, usually a few $100s. Not enough to trigger a criminal investigation without concrete evidence, but more than enough to terrify those who had little to spare. Lena Brooks fit the profile perfectly. No family, low income, single mother, child, attending a school with minimal security. Emily was the pressure point. Damien remained, still for a long moment, his eyes absorbing every line of data. Names appeared on the screen. Wallace Green, leader of the Rainford crew; Deshaun Knox, area operator for the Southern District; Barrett, the driver believed to be behind the wheel of the SUV. None of them had ever been convicted. But Damien did not need a courtroom. He needed certainty. He needed them to understand they had crossed something sacred. When Juno left the room, Damien rose and walked to the window, where rows of shipping containers stacked like steel walls glowed under the sodium lights. Each crate represented a piece of the power he commanded, built on structure and boundaries. No child was allowed to become a pawn in the games played by cowards. He took out his phone and dialed a number not stored in his contacts. A deep voice answered after 3 rings. "Do your work. No report needed. Just make sure they understand one thing. They chose the wrong child." Damien hung up and stood in silence, looking out, over the city darkening beneath him. No gunfire, no police, no headlines, only darkness recognizing darkness. And this time, the darkness stood with a 7-year-old girl. Emily sat on the living room floor with her back against the sofa, her arms wrapped around a frayed stuffed rabbit. The small apartment was quiet, except for the faint, uneven hum of the heater, a sound like the tired breathing of something trying hard to stay alive. Lena sat a few steps away, not wanting her daughter to feel cornered, though each word the girl spoke twisted something inside her. She had waited for this moment, hoping Emily might finally open up, but when the words actually came, Lena felt herself breaking apart piece by fragile piece. "Do you remember the day my shirt got torn? I didn't fall. Travis pushed me. He said I was a beggar. I don't understand why. I never asked anyone for anything." Emily's voice was barely louder than a breath, her eyes fixed on the stuffed rabbit's worn feet. Lena swallowed hard, fighting the trembling at the corners of her mouth. Her daughter continued speaking, as if she knew that if she stopped, she might never find the courage to begin again. "The next day, someone put my backpack in the bathroom. It got soaked, even my math book ripped. I showed it to my teacher, but she just told me to hang my bag higher next time. Then she kept teaching. No one asked anything else. I didn't tell you because you're already tired. I didn't want you to be sad." A coldness crept slowly up Lena's spine, not from the weather but from the way her daughter recited her pain as if it were something ordinary, something expected, like the morning bell or lunchtime in the cafeteria. One time, during recess, Travis told everyone not to play with me. He said if they did, they would catch poor. I don't know what catching poor means, but afterward no one talked to me. Except Lily, but she started sitting farther away. Yesterday she looked away when I waved. Emily tightened her grip on the rabbit, her small hands trembling. Lena tried to breathe deeply, but the air felt too thin to fill her lungs. And one day, when I was waiting for you at the gate, I saw that black car. It didn't do anything. It just sat there, quiet. But I knew someone was inside because I saw the phone light on the window. Every day it came a little closer. One time it followed us to the end of the street. I saw it in the bus mirror. The person inside wore a hood, but I couldn't see the face. One time the window rolled down just a little. Someone spoke. They said I was the girl in apartment number 11 and that my window curtain was torn. I got so scared, Mommy. So scared I couldn't sleep. But I didn't tell you because you already called the police and they didn't do anything. They said I imagined it. I drew it. I thought if I drew it, people would understand. But my teacher said I have a vivid imagination and sent me to the counselor. They asked if I watch scary movies. I've never seen any movies. Her head dropped as tears fell onto the stuffed rabbit, soaking into its worn gray fur. Lena could no longer keep her composure. She moved to her daughter, knelt down, and wrapped her arms around the trembling child, as if she could shield her from the entire world. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't see it sooner. I'm sorry you had to carry all of that alone." Emily did not answer, only rested her forehead on her mother's shoulder, her small body shaking with each breath. Lena knew apologies could not erase the marks etched into her daughter's spirit. But at least, from this moment on, Emily was no longer alone. And for the first time in weeks, she had been truly heard. No one interrupted. No one dismissed her. No one told her she imagined it. Damien believed her. And because someone had believed her, she found the courage to speak. Lena held her tighter, her gaze drifting to the window where the city stretched out beyond the glass, indifferent and cold. But somewhere out there, a man was doing what no one else ever had, and that changed everything. Lena first noticed the black SUV one late afternoon when she and Emily were walking home from the bus stop near their building. At first she thought it was simply a random parked vehicle, maybe someone waiting for a friend or resting after a long drive. But the next day it was there again, parked in the same place, this time with the engine running, the soft rumble just loud enough for someone attentive to notice. Lena gripped Emily's hand tighter, her eyes flicking toward the car, but the tinted windows were dark enough to hide everything inside. She pulled her daughter along a little faster, trying not to betray her unease. Still, the feeling lodged in her chest and would not loosen. 3 days later, The SUV returned at dismissal time. It never came too close, just close enough to exist in the corner of her vision, planting a question that had no answer. On another night, when she left the diner after her evening shift, she spotted it parked across the street, headlights off, unmoving as she walked past. Her heart pounded harder with every step, and she tried to reassure herself it was coincidence, but when the car appeared for the 5th time, then the 6th, then the 10th, fear stopped being a theory. One evening at dusk, she drew her bedroom curtains and saw the SUV directly across the narrow road. The streetlight reflected off a long scratch down its side that she had never noticed before. Lena stepped back from the window instinctively, her pulse hammering in her ears. She didn't know what the car wanted, but she knew with certainty it was watching them. Every morning she scanned the street as she walked Emily to school. Every night she paused at the apartment door, listening for the familiar hum of the engine. The car's presence, even without anyone stepping out, had become a form of terror, an invisible weight that seeped into their routines, turning quiet moments into constant vigilance. She called the police. The first time they asked for the plate number, she could not recall it. The second time they said nothing could be done without a direct threat. The third time the dispatcher told her to install a security camera if she felt unsafe. But cameras required money and time and paperwork, things a single mother working 2 jobs did not have. Even when she explained that a voice from the car had spoken to Emily, that they knew about the torn curtain in her child's window, the police merely took a note and said they would monitor the situation. No one came to check. No one called back. And the SUV continued to appear, never predictable, never gone, hovering just close enough to remind them it was there, just far enough to avoid being caught. Emily began waking in the night, shaking and drenched in cold sweat. Sometimes she sat silently for hours, refusing food, refusing words, clinging to her stuffed rabbit as if it were the last solid thing in her world. Lena saw the shift happen in her daughter's eyes, a child who had once been shy turning into a girl who watched every movement around her, who learned to glance over her shoulder, who listened for unusual sounds behind her. She was 7 years old and already learning to survive through silence. Lena felt helpless inside her own role as a mother. She could not protect her daughter. She had no one to call. And each passing day brought the fear that the car would become a hand pulling Emily away forever. She no longer slept deeply. Every sound from the street snapped her upright, phone in hand, staring at the clock. No one was protecting them. No one saw this as urgent. No one cared. Only the shadow of the SUV followed them relentlessly, like a second skin. And Lena understood more clearly than ever that they were being hunted. Slowly, quietly, but unmistakably. And no one acknowledged it, not until a man feared by an entire city received a trembling child's crayon drawing. Damien stood in his office before the sun had fully risen, the first light of dawn washing over the surface of Elliott Bay and casting a cold amber glow across the glass towers outside. He had been awake all night, not out of worry but out of a different kind of focus, one that kept the body still while the mind churned like a machine calculating without pause. On his desk lay the complete file on Lena Brooks, every detail cross-checked by Cole at least twice. They had not only learned everything about her and her daughter, but also about the network around them, neighbors, teachers, school staff, and every name connected to the SUV. All of it led back to the same group, the Rainford crew. Men who thrived in the shadows of psychological violence, feeding on the exhaustion of the poor and the indifference of the system to build a silent, merciless form of power. Damien had met hundreds of kinds of men before. Those who fired guns to earn respect, those who hid behind legal codes to pursue their own interests, and those who skulked in darkness like rats, emerging only when they sensed someone weaker. The Rainford crew belonged to the last category. They did not rely on public displays of violence. Their power seeped into every hallway, every crumbling doorway of old apartment buildings. They knew exactly which fear worked best. Not blood, not overt threats, but persistence, like a shadow that would not leave, like a whispered warning only one person could hear. And this time, they had made a mistake. They had touched a child no one was protecting, and that child had somehow found the one man who would listen. Damien did not think of himself as a good man. He never had. His life had been built on cold decisions and negotiations where the weaker side always lost. But he had rules, and his rules were simple. Never harm women or children. Never use fear as a weapon against those who cannot fight back. Those rules set him apart from the rest of the underworld, and now someone had broken that rule on territory he controlled. He picked up his phone and dialed Cole. In less than 3 rings, the familiar voice answered without greeting. Damien spoke only 2 sentences. They touched a family. Prepare the car. When Damien stepped out of the building, the sky was still dim. He did not wear his usual suit, choosing instead a long, dark gray coat with the collar turned up and fastened. His polished shoes struck the rain-damp pavement with steady, unerring steps. A black sedan waited at the curb. Cole sat in the front seat and turned when Damien climbed in. "Everything is ready," he said. Damien nodded, eyes sliding toward the window. The city was waking up. Early commuters filled the streets, and cafe lights flickered on, casting warm gold across the wet sidewalks. But inside Damien, something had already settled. It was not a plan or a strategy. It was a command. He would not wait. No warnings. No negotiations. This time he would act himself. Because when a child came to him as a last refuge, it ceased being a private matter. It became a matter of honor. The car turned into the southern neighborhood where peeling facades and sagging power lines etched a weary pattern along each block. As they passed Lena's building, Damien glanced up at the 3rd-floor window. The curtain remained closed. But he knew behind that curtain lived a mother and daughter breathing in fear every minute, and he would not let that continue. He did not need thanks. He did not expect to be remembered. He only needed every person who had ever sent that black SUV to school gates to learn one simple truth. There was a boundary they must never cross. And Emily Brooks was that boundary. Morning at Brookdale Elementary began like any other. Sleek SUVs and minivans lined the curb, parents hurriedly kissing children goodbye before driving off, and teachers stood at classroom doors clutching coffee cups. Wind swept through the bare trees, stirring up torn flyers, while the sound of laughter mingled with distant traffic. No one was prepared for what happened next. A black sedan turned into the bus lane, breaking every rule, yet no one protested. It rolled past the security booth without stopping, as though its presence had been pre-approved by something unspoken. The car stopped at the front steps. The rear door opened, and a man stepped out, Damien Rourke. He wore no security uniform, no badge, no official insignia. But everyone who had ever heard his name recognized him instantly. The long dark gray coat framed his tall figure, his face carved in stone beneath the pale morning light, his dark eyes sweeping over the campus with quiet assessment. He opened the other rear door and extended his hand. Emily stepped out, cautious but not afraid. Her small hand slid into his as naturally as if it belonged there. No words, no nod. Just a presence that tightened the air around them. People froze. A mother paused with her child's backpack strap half buckled. A little boy forgot to swallow his last bite of pastry. A teacher near the entrance nearly dropped her coffee cup. The entire schoolyard seemed pulled out of its routine rhythm, seized by something no one dared name but everyone felt. Damien did not hurry, nor did he perform any dramatic gesture. He simply walked a little girl into school. But the way he moved, each step deliberate, his eyes fixed on his path, drew every gaze like gravity. Emily looked up and saw the children who once laughed at her now pressed together, hands gripping their backpack straps. Travis, the boy who had shoved her into a wall, stood by the rail near the playground, his face drained of color. His mouth fell open, then snapped shut as he dropped his eyes when Damien's gaze passed over him. Several kids turned away, tugging friends aside. No one spoke. No one dared. Emily's teacher stood rigid at the classroom door, her mouth opening, as if to speak, and then closing again. She had never seen this man before, but she knew his reputation, and she understood that this morning she should remain silent. Damien escorted Emily to her classroom door, pausing a moment before he crouched slightly to meet her eyes. Their gaze held for a heartbeat. No need for words. No reminders. His presence was message enough. The girl gave a small nod and stepped inside. Damien rose and turned away without looking at anyone else. As he walked back to the car, a parent dropped their keys and didn't dare bend to pick them up. A guard approaching from across the courtyard abruptly changed direction. Damien entered the sedan. The door closed, and the car drifted away like a cold wind cutting through the school grounds. People remained frozen, unsure how to resume their morning routines. But one thing had changed irrevocably. The girl who had once been invisible, mocked, dismissed and disbelieved, was now escorted to her classroom by a man who carried the silence of an entire shadowed world. And his shadow was large enough to make everyone step back. In a few quiet minutes, without violence, without threats, Damien had restored order. Not with the power of weapons, but with a message no one dared put into words. From that morning on, no one touched Emily Brooks. No one pretended not to see, because now everyone knew someone was watching. And that alone was enough to make an entire school fall silent. Principal Conway looked out through the wide glass window of his second-floor office, his eyes narrowing as he watched the black car slip out of the school grounds, leaving behind a silence so heavy it felt like morning fog settling on the skin. He had never seen Brookdale Elementary so still. Not a single laugh, not a single hurried step, only bewildered and cautious eyes as if the entire campus had just witnessed something beyond ordinary comprehension. Conway had been a principal for more than 2 decades and had weathered every type of problem: students fighting, parents filing complaints, even incidents requiring police involvement. But never, in all those years, had a man walked through the school gates as though they were part of his own territory, without speaking, without legal authority, relying only on a cold, silent presence powerful enough to paralyze his entire operation. He knew the name, Damien Rourke, a name that when whispered in the hallway could make a teacher change direction. No one knew exactly what he did, but everyone knew not to land on the list of people who captured his attention. And now he had walked a child into school, not as a guardian, but as a message. Conway lowered himself into his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. The past reports about Emily Brooks flickered through his memory. A few notes from her homeroom teacher about her withdrawal, a handful of complaints from other parents saying their children felt uncomfortable around her, and multiple, formal complaints from her mother, Lena Brooks, filed with the administration. He remembered replying with a template response, polite, neutral, and utterly meaningless. The school has found no specific evidence of policy violations by any student. Individual incidents will be handled internally according to procedure. Thank you for your cooperation. Those cold, hollow sentences echoed in his mind now like footsteps in an empty room. He had remained silent, the way society often does when the victim has no one behind them. When injustice makes no noise, the easiest choice is to look away. But that silence had been shattered that morning, not by shouting, but by a calm step and a strong hand, holding the hand of the child he had once dismissed. Downstairs, in the small conference room, several teachers murmured about the strange morning. Miss Patterson, who had once advised that Emily learn to be stronger, tapped her fingers on the table, avoiding every pair of eyes. No one said it aloud, but all of them understood. A boundary had been crossed. Something in the way they saw Emily had changed. She was no longer the quiet, peculiar child. She had become the one child protected by someone they all feared. Within a few hours, the story spread through the neighborhood like a smoldering fire. Parents whispered in group chats, some wondering if they should transfer their children, others expressing concern, and some admitting, surprisingly, that they felt safer because at least someone had finally done something. The press was not yet aware, the police had not stepped in, and local officials had not yet heard the name Emily Brooks. But society had received the signal. A child who had been invisible was now defined not by school files, but by the shadow standing behind her, forcing everyone else to confront themselves. And Conway, who once believed the matter would fade like so many others, felt a chill along his spine for failing to act sooner. That same morning, the first message appeared quietly, an inquiry from a local reporter asking about the 7-year-old girl escorted to school by a crime figure, and by midday, the story was everywhere. Online news sites showed a photograph of the sleek black sedan parked at the Brookdale Elementary gate, paired with shocking headlines that made the entire Seattle community pause. Parents wrote in discussion groups that they no longer felt as safe as before, while teachers and administrative staff posted comments that read like confessions about responsibility and guilt. Conway turned on his phone during the emergency meeting and stared at the large screen as article after article appeared. Who protects a bullied child? 7 years old and threatened outside school? A crime figure escorting a student warning or protection. Cold sweat gathered on his forehead because he understood that the media was not just reporting the situation. It was shaping public opinion and placing pressure on the authorities. Around noon, the city government received a formal petition from the child's mother, Lena Brooks, requesting an investigation for child endangerment and the school's negligence. The South Seattle police chief was alerted, and the Rainford crew was mentioned in early reports as possibly connected to organized crime. Camera crews stood outside the school gates, parents live-streamed, and even the owner of the cafe across the street was caught glancing into the lens with suspicion. The State Department of Education announced it would review school security measures. In a matter of hours, a single overlooked case had become a community earthquake where power, safety, and responsibility were suddenly placed under scrutiny. Conway sat in his office watching everything unfold outside the window, feeling pulled into a storm he had not created yet now had to answer for. He had once believed the school system could protect its students, but now he saw clearly that silence and hesitation had created the perfect void for fear to grow. In the staff lounge, the teachers whispered, "What if she had walked here alone like every other day? How did no one notice that car? Did the school document everything properly?" And the most unsettling truth was that no one had a solid answer. The school, the local government, and the media were now all standing at the same crossroads. No one wanted to be the one accused of apathy, and yet no one wanted to shoulder the blame for everything unraveling. And as for Damian Rourke, he did not appear in the news, did not speak to anyone, but his presence had carved a void in the system that no official explanation could fill. By late afternoon, Conway returned to inform the Parent-Teacher Association that security adjustments and increased supervision would begin immediately, though he knew words alone meant nothing. The tremor that had shaken the community was not caused merely by a black car or a bullied child, but by the long, unbearable silence that had finally been shattered by a single, undeniable glance. Damian Rourke closed his office door at 1 o'clock in the morning, leaving behind the thick stack of files on his desk, the printed footage from Brookdale's cameras, the log of every appearance made by the black SUV, and the verified phone numbers and email chains tied to the members of the Rainford crew that Juno and Cole had traced. He examined each detail with surgical precision: the scratch along the side of the vehicle, the exact times it appeared during school drop-off, the address of Lena Brooks at the end of 35th South, the ignored medical notes and classroom reports involving a child named Emily Brooks, who had been bullied without intervention. He prepared a quiet indictment to send to the office of the South Seattle District Attorney, where prosecutors were already feeling the pressure from the media and community about child protection. Failures. Inside a cream envelope, he placed photocopies of the emails the mother had sent to the school, an image of the SUV caught by a tenant's security camera, statements from teachers, and a map connecting freight routes to Halston Freight Logistics, a shell company registered 3 months earlier under a false identity and linked to the same black SUV through photo comparison. Damian knew the legal process would not move quickly. It could take weeks, bogged down by procedure, evidence review, witness coordination, and the inevitable tug-of-war between police and prosecutors. But he also understood that if the file went in without pressure from outside, it could vanish into silence. So he added a video recording, dim lighting, Emily's eyes reflecting fear as she looked at the car parked outside her home. No narration. Only a child's terror captured clearly enough to tighten the throat of anyone who watched it. On the envelope he wrote a simple message. "This is a child, no. One heard. I heard her." After sending it off, he turned his monitor back on and stared at Seattle's skyline from the high floor of his office, towering buildings, streetlights, the worn rail lines of an old subway system, all of it a network built on tradition and power. But this time, he was breaking one of its links: the silence of a school system, the avoidance of the police, the indifference of the community. He did not expect gratitude. He only hoped something would move a decision from the DA, a public statement, an investigation that could not be buried. When the screen finally dimmed, Damian stepped onto the balcony, gazing down at Elliott Bay where the first hint of daylight shimmered across the water. In that quiet moment, he reminded himself that power was never what people claimed out loud. It was defined by what they did when no one was watching. And because a 7-year-old girl had asked him to walk her to school, he would do it. When he shut the balcony door and walked back across the wooden floor, the room stayed silent. But inside him, a current of resolve burned this time. There would be no endurance, only action. Damian followed the unfolding news through the night, and just after dawn, received a call from the South Seattle District Attorney's office. They were preparing to raid the Rainford crew. Everything he had sent, the camera footage, the image of the black SUV's bodywork, the mapped routes, the emails, the witness statements. The haunting video of Emily's frightened gaze had reached the threshold necessary for the DA to mobilize a task force with federal agents. Damien stood quietly in his office, watching the names appear on screen. Wallace Green, Deshaun Knox, and Barrett, each one on the list of suspects tied to extortion and child surveillance operations. The streets of South Seattle, where the group operated, were locked down for hours. Cargo trucks were searched, and the shell office of Halston Freight Logistics was raided. Damien felt no pride. He knew he had merely struck the match, not held the spotlight. When photos of the SUV appeared in the police report, matched with the scratches and timestamps that mirrored Emily's drawing, the Rainford crew began to collapse. 3 core members were led into interrogation rooms, phones seized, and young witnesses quietly identified. The system that had ignored months of warning signs was finally shaking. A message from Cole flashed on Damien's phone. "They are falling apart." Damien nodded, not in triumph but in acknowledgement of a shift that could not be undone. Children like Emily were no longer easy targets to discard. The message had been delivered. When fear is used as a weapon, someone eventually pays the price. Traffic diverted around the shutdown zone. Reporters camped outside, teachers whispered in break rooms, and parents anxiously exchanged glances, equal parts worry and relief. Brookdale Elementary rushed to implement new security measures, hiring additional guards, and installing cameras across the playground. The system was far from perfect, but Damien could see the landscape tilting. Emily walked into class that morning with different eyes, not the wary eyes glancing over her shoulder, but eyes carrying a fragile spark of hope. Damien left the city at dusk, his black sedan gliding along the road above Elliott Bay as the lights flickered across the quiet water. He turned to see the city one last time, a city built on power and silence, now forced to listen. And in that silence echoed a quiet truth. No child's voice would be frozen out forever. The late autumn glow cast a warm gold across the river when Lena Brooks stepped off the bus 2 blocks from the restaurant. She had passed this place countless times on her way to the hospital, but had never dared to walk inside. The high glass panels reflecting the sunset and the silhouettes of polished strangers made it feel like another world, one where someone like her was meant to remain on the outside looking in. But today her legs refused to carry her past it. She wore her old wine-colored dress, saved for rare occasions, paired with shoes worn thin at the heels, her hair pulled neatly back, her hands trembling as they pressed against the gleaming brass door handle. The host looked at her briefly, as though considering whether he should direct her elsewhere, but his expression shifted the moment she spoke. "My name is Lena Brooks. I don't have a reservation. But if possible, please tell Mr. Damien Rourke that I only want to say thank you." Before he could respond, she turned away, face burning with embarrassment, but the host stepped quickly behind the counter, whispered into a radio, then gestured gently for her to wait near the bar. No one stared, but she still felt painfully out of place among the tailored suits, soft golden lights, and the quiet symphony of crystal glasses chiming. Less than 5 minutes later, a man emerged from the hallway beside the kitchen, not with an entourage, not with noise or presence announced, but simply Damien, in a dark gray shirt with a nameless watch, his expression serious but not cold. He saw her immediately, paused for the briefest moment, then nodded. Lena stood, fighting the tremor in her hands. She had not rehearsed what to say, yet the words came unraveled from somewhere deep within. "I don't know how to thank you enough. Not just because Emily is safe, but because she laughs again now. She sleeps, she draws, she doesn't ask why everyone hates her anymore." Damien did not interrupt. He gestured toward a table beside the window where the river glowed beneath the fading light. "You don't need to thank me. It was the right thing to do." His voice was low, soft as the background music drifting through the room. Lena's throat tightened. "No one else did the right thing. I knocked on every door. The police, the school, the administrative office, everyone told me I was exaggerating. Only Emily believed someone would listen. And you did." Damien held still for a moment. "When I was a child, I knocked on doors too. No one opened them. I know what that does to a kid. I know how it breaks something inside them." Lena nodded slowly. She saw, for an instant, a fracture in the stone-solid exterior of the man across from her, something wounded, something long past but never gone. She reached into her purse, and carefully unwrapped a small object in a tissue, placing it on the table. I know this means nothing in your world, but Emily made it for you. A tiny star cut from cardboard, glitter glued unevenly across it, with a wobbly message in colored pencil at the center. Thank you for hearing me. Damien looked at it, not smiling but softening, as though the rough little star were delicate enough to break. He picked it up with both hands. Thank you for coming. If you need anything else, tell Cole. Lena stood. She knew she could not stay long in this world of polished floors and hushed voices, but she left without feeling small. As she walked away, she carried with her the certainty that her daughter was protected not only by action, but by a quiet promise from a man no one dared ask for, yet who chose to stand up anyway. Damien remained at the table long after she had gone. The paper star rested under the warm light, silent but brighter than every chandelier overhead. The red wine in the glass reflected the faint golden light, like the last blush of evening at the window as Lena sat there again, this time without feeling like a misplaced guest in a world that was not hers. Damien sat across from her, his eyes still and deep as a quiet river, the silence between them stretching out with a kind of meaning that felt almost like breath. She had never sat across from someone who made her want to speak endlessly, while also fearing that any word might shatter the fragile peace of the moment. You truly don't need to thank me, Damien said at last, but Lena only smiled, so softly it was almost a sigh. No, I do. Not only because you helped Emily, but because you made me believe again. Damien tilted his head slightly, his gaze steady on her face. Believe in what? That even in a world full of cruelty and coldness, there are still people who choose to do the right thing simply because it is right, not for gain, not for image, not because someone demanded it. Just because a little girl said, "He looks scary, so maybe he can protect me." Damien did not smile, but his eyes softened as if she had touched a part of him he had kept still for many years. I was once a child like her, he said quietly. No one cared, no one listened. Everyone just looked past me and walked on. That was when I understood if no one listens, you must become someone they cannot ignore. Lena nodded, her hand tightening around her glass, the warmth seeping into skin that had grown cold from long hours at work. You became that person, the one people cannot look away from, but you are not what they say you are. Damien said nothing. He was used to the distortion in other people's eyes. The cold-hearted man, the ghost of the underworld, the faceless boss, titles with no trace of a real human being attached. But Lena did not add anything. She simply looked at him with an expression that required no words. Then she said softly, as though confessing, I was afraid of you once. When Emily said she went looking for someone like you, I panicked. I thought, what if she asked help from the wrong kind of dangerous man? What if everything spins out of control? But now I know. She chose the right person. You never claimed to be good, and I don't even know if you are good in the way the world defines it, but you are the one who made everyone look, and that was what we needed most. Damien leaned back slightly, his hands folding together on the table. There are things I have done that are not right. There are people who disappeared because of me, people who did not deserve mercy. But with the girl, I did not need to be entirely right. Only right in that moment. Lena studied him for a long, quiet stretch before asking, almost without meaning to, Why, Emily? Damien closed his eyes briefly. Because no one should carry that kind of fear through childhood. Because no one should learn silence as a way to survive. And because a child walked into my place, a place no one dares step into, with trembling hands and a breaking voice, yet still stood straight and asked, Can you take me to school? And something like that cannot be ignored. After a pause, Lena reached into her bag and pulled out a sheet of paper folded into quarters. It was a new drawing from Emily. There were no angry, shadowy figures now, no black car lurking in a corner. Instead, there were two people holding hands as they walked toward a school entrance, with a smiling sun overhead and a wobbling line of crayon letters spelling, Mr. Damien is the big light. Damien did not touch the drawing, he only looked at it. But in his eyes was the unmistakable glimmer of someone who would carry that image in memory like a fulfilled promise. Lena tucked the drawing away and stood. Thank you again, not only for Emily, but because I learned how to believe again too. Damien rose with her, offering no grand gesture, no goodbye handshake, no polite ritual, only a steady, solemn nod. When Lena stepped out of the restaurant, the city lights had bloomed, painting the streets like a floating galaxy draped across the night. And somewhere within it, something small but profound was stirring back to life in the heart of a man who once believed he had lost the ability to create anything good. On an early winter afternoon, with the wind off Elliott Bay carrying a sharp chill, Lena returned to the restaurant out of a new habit. Not because she expected anything, but because it felt like a soft pause in a life still marked by its hardships. She was not looking for Damien. She did not know if she would ever see him again. But this place, with its warm lights and subdued music, had become tied to the turning point that brought Emily's smile back, and her own ability to breathe without a knot of fear tightening every night. The host recognized her, and no longer wore the wary look from her first visit. He smiled, nodded, and guided her to the familiar table near the window. The table was empty but prepared with care, as though someone had quietly reserved it. Lena sat, wrapping her hands around the cup of hot tea placed before her before she could even order. She looked toward the river, the surface glimmering with the fading light, a reflection of the gaze she remembered from the night someone silently walked her child towards safety. In that stillness, her eyes caught a small object on the table, tucked beneath the water glass as though intentionally hidden from attention. A square box of midnight-colored velvet, elegant but not ostentatious. Her heart fluttered once as she opened it. Inside, nestled in white silk, was a silver necklace, delicate as a line of moonlight, with a tiny 5-pointed star as its pendant, so meticulously crafted it looked carved from light rather than metal. There was no tag, no brand card, no receipt, but Lena knew exactly who had placed it there. Beneath the silk lining was a small folded note, handwritten in a slanted script that was sharp yet gentle, unsigned. A short message of exactly 9 words. Now the world believes the girl, and that is enough. Lena read the sentence over and over until tears stung her eyes. No name, no date, no mention of I or him. Just a single thought, like something left behind by someone who appears at the exact moment he is needed, does what must be done, and slips back into the shadows, again. With absolute precision, she touched the tiny star, the cool silver meeting her fingertip, and felt her throat tighten. She did not need a goodbye because she understood. Damien had never been someone who appeared to be seen. He was the presence one sensed in moments of need, and the one who vanished when everything was finally right. When Lena fastened the necklace around her neck, the little pendant settled on her collarbone exactly as though it had been made for that place. Not too heavy to burden her, not too light to be forgotten. A quiet reminder that someone had seen her child's worth, had stepped forward when no one else would, and had left only after no thanks were needed. She stayed for a long while, undisturbed, as if the staff understood this was a moment meant to remain untouched. When Lena finally rose, the last light of the day had disappeared behind the distant buildings. She did not turn back to look for Damien. She knew he had already left what mattered most: hope, not only for Emily but for herself. And sometimes that is more powerful than presence. Outside, the crowd surged through its ordinary rush. But for Lena, each step felt lighter, steadier. The necklace was not just a gift. It was proof that no matter how dim or harsh the world could be, there was still room for what is right so long as someone was willing to do it. Without credit, without applause, without leaving a name. The next morning, Emily woke as the first sunlight touched her windowsill, no longer startled awake by the pounding of her own heartbeat in the dark, no longer peering through the curtains with terrified eyes. She rubbed at her face, then smiled when she saw the backpack her mother had prepared, neatly placed beside the bed, with a small lunch inside and the new comic book Lena had bought with the money she earned from her night shift. Around Lena's neck, the silver necklace with its star pendant shimmered softly like a silent blessing. Emily stared at her mother for a long moment before wrapping her arms around her without a word. It had been so long since she had initiated a hug like that. On the walk to school, Emily's steps no longer held the hesitance they once did. Each stride was steadier, without the anxious backward glances or her habit of gripping her mother's hand too tightly, as if expecting danger to leap out at any moment. The schoolyard was as bustling as ever, yet something felt different in the air. Teachers who once moved with indifference now stood along the hallway, scanning the clusters of students with genuine alertness, their previous cold, perfunctory smiles replaced by eyes that were unmistakably paying attention. Emily crossed the gate and met the gaze of Principal Conway. He hesitated for a brief second, then offered a stiff smile and a small nod, as if trying to prove he was now watching, that he saw her, that the months of dismissal were no longer acceptable. Inside the classroom, her desk was no longer isolated. A new table had been placed beside hers, and sitting there was a pale-haired girl named Zoe, once a quiet newcomer who seemed to dissolve into the background much like Emily herself. They were paired as project partners, and only a few lessons later Lena received a message from the homeroom teacher. Today, Emily raised her hand to answer 3 times and laughed so much. "I think she is opening up again." Reading it, Lena pressed her hand to her chest where the cool silver star rested against her skin, then lifted her eyes to the window where the morning light seeped in, as though announcing that something was slowly being restored. During recess, Emily was no longer curled behind the library building. She was running across the playground, playing tag with Zoe and 2 other children, her laughter ringing through the air and drawing surprised glances from passing teachers. Miss Patterson, who once ignored every obvious sign, had been reassigned. Rumor had it the district office had conducted an internal investigation. She now worked alone in a back office, shuffling paperwork, forbidden from interacting directly with students. Emily's entire class had shifted. Children who once joined in the bullying now sat separately, no longer clustering together to overshadow the weaker ones. Some had been moved to different classes, some taken home early by parents who walked silently, as though carrying the weight of their own shame. In the eyes of the teachers and the students, something was changing, not fear, but awakening. Someone had forced the entire system to look at itself. Emily began writing in her journal again. On the first page that had been blank for months, she wrote in trembling but hopeful strokes, "Today it is sunny. I played with Zoe. No one pushed me or laughed at me. I felt happy." Beneath the entry was a small drawing of 2 little girls standing in the sunlight beneath a bright blue sky and a smiling sun, with a tiny star drawn in the corner that looked very much like the pendant her mother wore. That afternoon, when Lena met her daughter at the gate, Emily flung herself into her arms, chattering nonstop about her day, about a math problem she solved correctly, about a teacher who praised her handwriting. Lena listened, tears slipping down her face, not from sorrow, but because she was finally witnessing her daughter living as a child again. The terror had not vanished completely, but it no longer ruled Emily's world. Her childhood was returning, piece by fragile piece, restored by a man whose name would never appear in any report about educational reform, yet whose imprint would echo in every bright laugh on the playground and in the hopeful sparkle of a little girl learning how to dream again. Lately, Lena found herself waking not to alarms fueled by anxiety or dread that something worse might happen to her child, but to the slow bloom of coffee drifting through the kitchen as Emily sat at the table working on crafts for school. The calendar on the refrigerator was no longer filled with meetings with police officers or appointments with principals, but with Lena's official work schedule at the county medical center. She had been hired as a full-time records clerk, a job that was not glamorous but steady, with health insurance, something she once thought impossible after so many years surviving on shifts as a waitress and doing part-time childcare. The woman who called her in for the interview was the head of human resources, with unexpectedly kind eyes. The conversation began with a single sentence. "I read your file. I am a mother too. I understand." And just like that, Lena was seen as a person, not a case number, not a sad story. Since the scandal broke and spread through the local news, Seattle had begun shifting in small but unmistakable ways. The school district issued new regulations requiring unannounced internal inspections at elementary schools in low-income neighborhoods. A hotline was created specifically for students and parents to report bullying, especially cases involving psychological distress or signs of being followed by strangers. The collapse of the Rainford crew triggered a chain of cross-departmental investigations. Local law enforcement, once criticized for indifference and slow reaction, now had to publicly release the outcomes of previously ignored reports. Some mid-level officers were reassigned, some were suspended pending internal review. Most importantly, families like Lena's now had accessible channels to speak up, and voices like Emily's were finally being treated with a seriousness long overdue. No one knew exactly who had forced the system to move. No one mentioned Damian Rourke in any news segment or official document, but everyone sensed that some unseen force had redrawn lines society once tiptoed around. Lena could now finish her shift at 5, pick Emily up on time, without rushing to hand her off to a neighbor or letting the child walk home alone in quiet fear. Their dinners, eaten, at the small table in their old but tidy apartment, always included Emily's favorite vegetables, a few simple but nourishing dishes, and a cheerful story shared between spoonfuls, as if the child wanted to stretch the moment of happiness just a bit longer. Lena still wore the silver necklace Damien had left, always around her neck, not as jewelry, but as a symbol. Each time her fingers brushed the tiny star, she remembered the night Emily sat trembling in a restaurant far beyond their world, and a powerful man decided to step into the shadows of injustice to make something right. At night, when the city sank into its late-hour rhythm, Lena wrote in her journal again after years in which she could only manage lists of debts and work shifts. Now she wrote about hope, about her plan to take extra courses to advance her job, about saving money to eventually move to a safer neighborhood. The pages no longer absorbed tears but carried the breath of a woman, relearning how to live not merely to survive but to aim for something brighter. As for Emily, each day she grew braver, raising her hand in class, joining new games without needing someone to lead her. One afternoon, when Lena asked what she wanted to be when she grew up, Emily answered with steady certainty, "I want to be a lawyer, so I can help people no one believes." Lena looked at her daughter, speechless. Not because the dream was lofty, but because she knew that in every word, her child was carrying both the wounds she once endured and the strength restored to her by someone who left no name behind. In Emily's eyes, the future was no longer a looming shadow but a path maybe unpaved, but finally lit by a distant glow. And Lena, at last, could hold her daughter's hand without fear of storms or darkness, because she knew she was no longer walking alone. Morning light spilled through the windows of the small apartment, drifting into every corner, as if gently touching the shadows that had once been filled with fear and helplessness. Emily sat by the window, her legs swinging softly, a picture book resting in her hands, her clear young eyes reflecting a world that no longer threatened her the way it once had. Lena stood in the kitchen making her first cup of tea, watching her daughter with a tenderness that rose inside her like a quiet breath of peace she had never truly known before. Their lives were no longer what they had been. Gone were the secret footsteps trailing behind the child. Gone were the cold, dismissive voices that brushed off her fear. Gone were the doors slammed shut when Lena knocked seeking help. Everything had shifted, not because of some grand revolution, but because a man who had lived most of his life in the shadows chose to use his power to bring light to a little girl who was nothing to him. The story of Emily and Lena is not merely one of surviving fear, but a reminder that when compassion is placed in the right hands, when power is used to protect instead of to oppress, the world can tilt toward something better. Damien Rourke no longer appeared. He had stepped out of their story like a figure from a folktale, but what he left behind could not be erased. A quiet truth that there are things which need no fame, no gratitude, only the right person doing the right thing at the right moment. Because of that, a 7-year-old girl could laugh again, a mother could sleep through the night, and a community finally began to look inward and change. And that is why this story has touched millions of hearts. My friend, after hearing this entire journey, how do you feel? Have you ever found yourself or someone you love trapped in a moment of helplessness, overlooked in a world too busy to care? Did this story remind you of a time someone stepped in for you? Or perhaps of a moment when you wished someone would? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Every honest reflection is not only a gesture of empathy, but a source of strength for us to continue bringing meaningful, human stories to you each day. And if you believe this video deserves to be shared, please like it and send it to your friends and loved ones. Do not forget to subscribe so you will not miss any of the heartfelt stories we bring next. We are here to listen to you, to walk with you, and to help plant small seeds of hope in a world that can still be far too indifferent. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We wish you and your family good health, peaceful days, steady happiness, and the light you may be seeking, wherever the darker corners of your life may be. Goodbye, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.